Welcome back to another episode of I Wish They Knew, a show where we share big ideas that deserve more attention in about the time it takes to enjoy a cup of coffee. I'm Joe Hirsch. Today's wish comes from Charlotte Otter. Charlotte is an executive communications expert, two-time novelist, former journalist, speaker, and advisor. For 2 decades, she led global communications teams and today advises a wide range of clients on reputation management, change management, and ways to build more effective team communication. Really important stuff. Her new book, and it's a good one, is We Need New Leaders, Mastering Reputation Management to Reshape the C-Suite. It's a timely book, timely message. Charlotte, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Joe. It's great to be here.
Pleasure to have you with us. So what do you wish more people knew?
I wish more people knew that they can work quite actively on their own reputations to land, keep, and create their dream leadership roles.
So leaders spend a lot of time working on the art and the practice of leadership. Their reputation management is not something that they often pay a lot of attention to, but it's probably one of the most important features of their leadership because it can set the culture, it can define the company brand, it sometimes even impacts the share price, as you point out in the book. What are some of the ways that leaders can build their reputations? And is it something that just happens organically with time and strong results, or can they do it more consciously?
My thesis is consciously is better, because if you leave it to organic development, you're kind of out of control. So reputation is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So on that level, it is not in your control. But if you proactively work on your reputation, you have more chance of influencing what gets said about you when behind closed doors.
I thought it's interesting how so much of how people see us is a result of how we want to be seen, but don't always control those outcomes, as you said. Do you think that leaders are giving enough attention to this part of their leadership?
So some are. In my experience, CEOs of publicly listed companies think a lot about reputation because they are beholden to shareholders. So they think about company reputation, and quite a few of them think about their own reputation, and the two are quite significantly attached. I think that founders of startups also think about reputation because often with a founder, their narrative is deeply entwined with the business narrative of their company. But it's the messy middle of leaders who are not necessarily in publicly listed companies or not necessarily founders of startups, where leaders are just cracking on with business, leading their teams, thinking about their revenue, looking at their sales, thinking about the culture of their organization, but not really thinking deeply about reputation.
Yeah, they're thinking more about results, not reputation, though the two do go hand in hand, but one is a result of a carefully coordinated and cultivated set of practices. And the other, they just kind of let happen. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if they're lucky enough to have a communications team, their communicators might occasionally prod them. Now's the moment. We're releasing a new product. There's a press release. You're going to have to talk to the media. Let's burnish your media relation skills. Or they're getting on stage to do a keynote. Let's work on your presentation skills. So there will be inflection points where they might think about it, but they're not thinking about it in a holistic way.
One of the ways you talk about building those reputations is creating and establishing narratives around how you want to be seen by others and what important values you want projected to, in a forward-facing way. Talk about the role of building out those personal narratives to build and to protect one's reputation.
Somebody said recently, stories are our oldest technology. And I've been in rooms where I've said to board members, you need to tell more stories, and they've literally laughed at me. But stories are critical for building human connection. They are connective tissue. It's what makes me understand you, Joe, as a human, when you tell me a story about yourself. And then I remember that because stories stay in our brains much more than facts and figures. So what I say to my clients and to leaders is you need to build out the set of personal stories that are authentic and natural for you to tell. So you're not learning them. You're not sort of going into a situation and kind of swatting your stories off by heart. They're your natural stories that you tell. And then try to pick some that match your business strategy. So your story is also telling a story about you, but simultaneously a story about your business. And it is possible to find both. And then I say those stories, stories are like a mosaic, and they build up together kind of narrative pattern that people receive about you and understand who you are and where you're coming from. One of my favorite books recently is called The Narrative Age, and it's by Frank Wolf, who is the co-founder and head of strategy at Staffbase, which is a comms tech company. And Frank has coined a concept called the narrative moat. Now, the moat is a common concept to leaders. The moat is your protection against competitive advantage. But the narrative moat also is a protective shield. The more stories you tell about yourself and your business, the more trust you build with your audiences, so that when crisis comes, and it does come, you already have those elements of trust in place so that you can recover more quickly from the crisis.
I'm glad you brought up trust, because it's really hard to discuss reputation and reputational management without talking about trust. And you had a really nice way of putting it in the book. I think I'll get this correctly. You said trust is reputation's closest sibling. I thought that was nice. What's the most common way that leaders inadvertently break trust? And part two of that question, what is the quickest way they might go about repairing it?
So the quickest way to break trust is to have your words and your behaviors not match. So if you say, we're a company that in our culture prioritizes radical candor, everyone is free to fail, we're an innovative company, and then when somebody fails, you fire them, you break trust. So I always say to leaders, and it sounds so deceptively simple, but it is the hardest part of reputation, because in a crisis moment or in a moment of challenge, a leader's probably not going to be thinking, oh, I talked about radical candor 3 months ago. They're just going to think, who is the idiot who did this? They need to go. And yet the employees will the employees will remember. And the employees will say, but I thought we had a culture of psychological safety and now you're firing people. So words and behavior really, really need to match, building that narrative moat for when the crisis comes. If the trust is broken, I always say to leaders, you have to genuinely and from the heart apologize, and as quickly as possible. So don't let a week or a month go between the inciting moment and the loss of trust. Try to act as fast as possible and as humanly as possible, and speak with vulnerability and say, the thing that I did was a mistake. I acted too fast. I acted in error. And I'm sorry that it happened. And these are the things I'm going to try and do to repair it. And that goes for leaders as much as it goes for businesses that are in crisis. It's a complete parallel.
Right. And if people can see that you're reestablishing alignment between words and deeds, and that there's a conscious effort to actually act on those commitments, that's probably a good step in the right direction.
Yes, for sure. It's a kind of a form of reparation. So you're saying the mistake was made. I acknowledge that I was at fault. These are the 3 steps we're now going to take as a company to make sure that that doesn't happen again.
Do you think a lot of companies get that memo when they do break trust? Are they following the right script?
If they, A, have a communications team, step 1, and B, listen to them. If they have communicators, the communications team will tell them this. Communicators know this. But one of the issues with comms, it's a little bit like HR. Comms is still fighting to get its seat at the table, and leaders forget to bring comms in, and then they bring communications in once they've already decided what the plan of action is, and communicators get to write the email, often far too late. You need comms at the table to help you make those key decisions.
And I think along with that, getting honest feedback is probably a very important way for the leader of this business to understand more about his or her own reputation and how it's holding up with the people most important to them. What are your suggestions for how leaders can cultivate an environment where people feel safe to share?
Yeah, so I mean, if I was advising a CEO on reputation, I wouldn't necessarily say get the feedback from all your employees, but I would say get feedback from a healthy mix. And you once again can rely on your communicators to be the go-betweens, because communicators are often amazingly tapped into your organization, more than leaders know, because communicators are tapped into the water cooler conversations. So use your comms folks to go out and put feelers out and find out what the organization is saying. That's one method. A second method is for leaders to have an executive communicator or reputation coach. So somebody who's very actively working with them on their reputation. And with my clients, I do a reputation 360. And the value of a reputation 360 is what you say about yourself, very valuable, but does it match what other people say about you? If it doesn't match, we've got a problem and we need to fix that. There's a gap there, there's a trust gap, there's a reputation gap, and we need to work on it.
Who's part of that circle when you're gathering feedback from different stakeholders about the leader's reputation? Obviously, you have direct reports. Beyond that, who are some of the people you're looking at?
So I think, peers, direct reports, and senior, if the leader is not the CEO. If the leader is the CEO, I tend to work with a couple of close friends and family members, people on the leadership team, and people they've reported to in the past. So you get that holistic, healthy mix. If you're only talking to direct reports, maybe sometimes people feel, and I must say, I always get the feedback anonymously, but sometimes the language can be a giveaway and people feel a little bit insecure. So I try to get a healthy mix of above, parallel, and below.
What about leaders who run lean teams, new startups with limited funding? What are some of the ways that they can make sure that they're bringing a comms perspective into their leadership and into their executive planning when they don't have budget for these things, but still feel it's important to message and to manage their stories, their narratives, the way you're talking about?
So one thing to do is to remember that your reputation is built up of narratives, behaviors, and network. So we talked already about narrative and behavior, and those two need to match. But your networks are really important because the network is like the algorithm of your reputation. It just powers your reputation. So your network is where you're showing up, and it's digital, it's social media, it's also your industry associations, it's your alumni organizations, it's your friendship groups. So make sure that your messages and your stories and your behaviors are consistent across your online presence. I see startup founders doing this absolutely brilliantly, but these are people who are natural communicators. So they're naturally telling the story of their business through storytelling, through video, on social media. Those who are less comfortable with it, they could hire temporary staff, they could hire a consultant, they could hire a reputation coach, get in somebody on a fractional basis or get in somebody for one day a week and then listen to what they say. So don't pay for people and then ignore what they're telling you.
Yeah, not money well spent.
Yeah.
So when a leader's reputation does take a hit, and inevitably it will, talk about the steps of repair. How can leaders get their reputations back and in a way that lasts?
Look, it's really hard. Sometimes it's irreparable damage. And I'm not going to lie to you, Joe. Sometimes, and I've seen it. It's very hard. Leaders literally have to disappear for a couple of years and kind of come back. Those for whom it hasn't been such a hard hit, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about companies. It's apologize fast, be human in your apology, be real, don't do legalese, speak as if you're speaking to your cousin or your grandma. Be genuine, be human, and show what are the reparation steps you're going to make. So there's something I learned recently about single loop and double loop leaders. And to me, this really goes to reputation. So single loop leaders see a problem, fix. Double loop learners see a problem, fix, and then ask, what did I do in my behavior to cause this situation? And that is such a powerful thing for leaders to ask because it shows humility, it shows vulnerability, and it shows a willingness to change.
And it shows that they're reflective enough to even ask the question.
Absolutely. And people will trust somebody who demonstrates that they are reflective enough.
The book is We Need New Leaders, and the author is Charlotte Otter. Charlotte, thanks for sharing your wish with us today.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's been lovely.